Welcome to this webinar on data-driven decision-making at Microsoft Cloud Supply Chain. I have the pleasure of having with us Apoorav Trehan, who is the principal. He heads the Cloud Supply Chain function. He has a very interesting experience. Started a long-term person at Microsoft, so he's going to take us through that. Maybe give us more details. And just before we begin, these are our monthly webinars that we hold on the second Wednesdays of every month. And the idea is to introduce our partners, students, and partner companies to the latest case studies or things businesses have done in supply chain management to create improvement and benefits for the overall supply chain. So over to you, Apoorav.
Great. Thank you so much, Piyush. So firstly, thanks for the opportunity to coming here and sharing. But before I begin, I just want to ask, can you see the screen well? Like I see the screen, but I also see the camera things here. Do you also see the same thing, or do you just see the presentation and not the people? I don't know how Zoom works. I apologize.
So we see your presentation pretty clearly. I think I see it clearly. So there is a small band of people. So yeah.
How do I? Is there a way for me to hide this?
Oh, you want to hide it?
Yeah, because then I can show you the full thing. Right?
You can just double click your screen, and each of us can do it at our level. If you double click on
it's okay. I think I was able to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. So firstly, thanks Piyush for the context and for setting it up. To give a little bit of added context on my role, I am part of the Microsoft Cloud Supply Chain organization. The organization is led by a gentleman called Cliff Henson. He's our CVP. He's the senior executive leading the cloud supply chain. The overall team's around 2,000 to 3,000 people. My team's function in the cloud supply chain is under the strategy and transformation vertical. My team's responsible for the strategy office of the supply chain to figure out what, as we're thinking of our node strategies, as we're thinking of our data strategies, things like that, how are we kind of setting it up to meet the challenges for the future? So I think that's the core function that my team's kind of driving at this point of time. I've been in Microsoft 16 years now. I joined, years ago, and there was when I joined, I had an offer from Amazon as well, but they used to only sell books. Just to put it in context for everybody new here, I'm that old. So the so so then throughout the 16 years at Microsoft, it's been a phenomenal journey. I've loved it. My goal was to join Microsoft and stay here for 3 years, quit and do a startup. Coming to 16, I still find myself challenged every day, and that I'm learning something new. So that has kept me, excited. But many people ask me what is strategy and what is the strategy function. So I thought this is probably the best Dilbert I can share with you on what how to think about strategy, because it's one of those words that gets thrown around a lot, and I am still coming to terms in my own role. What does that mean? So I love it how it says, our strategy is to be nimble and agile, and then just like as opposed to everybody else's, it was supposed to be clumsy and slow, right? So it's it's one of those things. The day I got this role, a colleague of mine said me to still work, so I just keep it close to heart. For our discussion today, I was talking to Piyush, and I think from a flow perspective, we'll start with some big picture context setting, right? Because one of the things that the cloud supply chain in itself is very young. The cloud is very young, right, across the world, and the cloud supply chain is even younger. So unlike traditional manufacturing supply chains and production supply chains, this is a area that's very, very, very immature to a certain degree, and we're trying to drive that maturity into this function. So we'll set up that context. We'll set up the big picture context of how does Microsoft play in the cloud. We'll talk about what are the challenges across the supply chain. Then we'll get into the data, and there I was talking to Piyush, but one of the ways that we are thinking of doing it is we'll share a COVID case study, and we'll share how we used the data-driven decision making. In first, we lay out a framework, right, just for us to for this discussion of how we think about the various dimensions of data-driven decision making, and then we'll use a COVID study and walk through that in like how Microsoft handles that. I'd love your feedback, your thoughts. As we go through this, if you have questions, please, type them out, shout them out. Piyush, I'm not able to see the chat. So if there are questions that come up, please let me know, and I will be happy to address them either as we are going through or, at the end, right? However it works. Great. So with that, I will start. So this is the mission of Microsoft, and it is basically reads very simply, right? Empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And it's when I joined the company 16 years ago, this was one of the things that I did not frankly understand. I was like, okay, this is something, it's a tagline that companies put out, everybody has one. But as I have spent 16 years here, one of the things that I've learned is that the impact that Microsoft can drive as an organization, just by the virtue of its size, is huge. And having a mission like this puts things in perspective for the team. So that's why I wanted to share with it is that we, as a company, the belief in the core of the company is to empower people as much as we can. And as you go through the presentation, you'll see that theme come out. Now, I'm making a slight transition here, but I wanted to make the transition into the space of what do we call the digital transformation. So in whatever worlds we are in, right, like whatever lines of business that you are all from, I saw somebody who has, who is from, the furniture business, people who are from the analyst side, people who are from other walks of, industry. There are certain very basic things that are happening right now. All specifically in the last 18 months, with the world going online, there has been a need for business models to transition to an online business model in many cases where possible. In some industries, just not, right? In many cases, parts of the business model or the entire business model has moved online. And they're going through an evolution right now. And what you see on the right side is the evolution of the business. It's like, how do I engage customers, empowering the employees, optimizing operations? How do I transform my products? And then on the left-hand side is how the technology and how the technology is going to enable this. And the three pillars of technology, if you see here, one is in the cloud. How do I build an intelligent platform, right? How do I create more personal interactions with people? How do I reinvent the productivity of my team, right? So if you remember Alan Greenspan, right, like 16 years ago, when computers came around, productivity was the key thing in the economy that was driving most of the output, and nobody really understood it for the first few months. I think we are at the cusp again, where we will see the combination of intelligent technology driving productivity to the levels that we haven't seen before. And that's one of the transformations that you'll see the world going right now. So with that, I'm going to move to the next one. But what is the cloud? And Piyush, I added this slide after our discussion yesterday. But I love the definition, because the definition starts with the word saying cloud. The definition of the cloud can seem murky, which I wholeheartedly agree, because the cloud is a very misused term. It is also an overused term in the industry. So my goal here is just to set context, since all of us are coming from different walks of life, that what is the cloud? The cloud, basically think of the cloud as a global network of servers. The cloud is not a physical entity. It is this vast network of servers sitting across the world in many data centers, right, that are hooked together to form a single ecosystem. So it doesn't matter where the server actually is. It's all virtualized, and you hear this word virtualized a lot in the cloud world, that we call this a single ecosystem. Currently, if you think about the world, there are a few big cloud players. There is Microsoft, there's Amazon, there's Google, Facebook, VMware, right? These are the big companies that are currently have Salesforce, that have a cloud presence that's really big. But what that really means is that they have got big data centers where they run servers with their stuff on it, right? So that's pretty much what it is. I'm sorry, give me a second. My slide order seems to have jumped somehow. It's supposed to go here. So as we talk about the Microsoft cloud, there is any questions, any thoughts so far before I start talking about the Microsoft cloud? So Microsoft started on this journey of creating a cloud around 10-ish years ago, 9 years ago, with an offering called Azure. Some of you might have heard it. It is a product offering. It's called Microsoft Azure, and it's a cloud offering. As the team was putting together a framework in like how to think about the cloud, there were a few guiding principles that came out of it. And the guiding principles was first putting people first. And this is people across the world, in the organizations, in our customers, organizations, and in the world at large. How do we enable innovation? How do you enable, an inclusive culture? How do you ensure that the cloud doesn't have barriers? Right? So that's one. The second is, how do you create impact faster? Because if you think about it, right, businesses across the world, creating faster impact, faster revenue realization, those are the key things that drive all businesses. So how do we set up a cloud that enables that? How do we reduce cost for our customers? And how do we make it agile so that as technology evolves, because technology is evolving at an unprecedented rate right now. The kind of change we are seeing in technology right now, we haven't seen in our lifetimes, and it's just accelerating right now. So how do we ensure that it does that? And then how do we have a trust relationship? So one of the key things that Microsoft learned early on, and most of the cloud providers learned early on, was that the key to a cloud was trust. And trust is a very personal thing that people have, but also companies have. And it is built over time. It is built with things like how do we protect data? How do we ensure that sovereignty of data is maintained? If you look across the world right now with GDPR, with other data restrictions coming in, there is a whole there's a whole momentum right now in the industry that data cannot leave certain geographical boundaries. So how do we set up a cloud that ensures that data sovereignty is actually achieved, and that we have that trust with the customers that your data is your data and that it's protected, right? And then how do we have AI and ML? You must have heard this, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, are becoming buzzwords, no doubt, in the industry, but they are also very core fundamental technology changes and evolution that's happening right now. We are right now in the middle of how I think about it, an AI evolution in the work, in every walk of life. So how do you build AI that is responsible? How do you build an AI that that fosters innovation, but also is responsible as a corporate citizen, so, or entity? So those were the kind of guiding principles that Microsoft started as we thought through the cloud. This is a visual of what the Microsoft cloud currently looks like. You have Microsoft Azure, which is the fundamental thing. You might have heard things like VMs, which is virtual machines, IaaS, which is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. All that happens as part of what you see here in Microsoft Azure. Then on top of that, we have Power Platforms, GitHub, Office 365, LinkedIn, Dynamics, blah, blah, blah. I think Microsoft overall, there are like 70 plus products currently out there that are sitting in the cloud, right? You have these, it's a whole ecosystem that is that has been virtualized, and there are a lot of services and customers that are using the Microsoft cloud. With that comes some core things around how do we do security, how do we do management, how do we do compliance, and all that, which is also built as core tenants of the cloud. So security, if you think about that, that's a core tenant of the cloud. Being zonal is a core. By zonal, I mean like you have to ensure that you're not geographically dependent, that then you are you have the flexibility, but at the same point of time, you can put boundaries in the cloud, right? All this, and I'm making a transition here, puts a challenge for the supply chain. But what is the cloud supply chain? So the team that I'm responsible for, our number one goal coming down from Satya is, for this whole Microsoft cloud, we have to ensure that our customers have capacity when and where they need it. So think about it. Some of you might be using Microsoft Office. You go and when you're on Office 365, you hit save and you save an Excel file. The Excel file gets saved to the cloud. Our team's responsibility is to ensure that there is space to store that file in the cloud. Okay? That's a very micro case. Now you expand that case and think about an entity like Walmart or an entity like Adobe or some big companies that are out there, the Fortune 500. 95% of the Fortune 500 today use the Microsoft cloud, and that puts a unique pressure on the supply chain, because we have to ensure that for these big corporate entities, there is capacity available for the cloud when and where they need it. So if Walmart needs to come up with a winter fall sale and they're going to run an online campaign for it, there needs to be that space. Just now the Olympics happened. The Olympics were streamed through the Microsoft cloud. Our team's job was to ensure that there is space in the cloud for ensuring that it can be streamed, that you can actually watch it when you're on television, right? Like there is a there's a whole service that runs behind it, and that we have the capacity needed where that is happening. So the supply chain's responsibility is critical, and across the Microsoft universe, it is what we call a P0 from a top management perspective. That everything else can fail, but this function can't fail because our customers need to have the ability to grow. So, with that, I'm going to talk about the challenges of the Microsoft Cloud supply chain, and then I'm keeping an eye on my watch here. And then I will make a transition into data, and then how do we use data sciences. But from a cloud supply chain, right, our biggest challenge, and it is weird to call this a challenge, but it's a challenge for a supply chain. I think it's a great opportunity for Microsoft. But we are seeing phenomenal growth of the Microsoft Cloud. FY21 revenue exceeded like 69 billion, growing at 34%. So imagine, like, in our lives, like, I've been Microsoft 16 years, so probably I'm not the right person to talk about this, but people who have seen various industries tell me all the time that it's very rare to be part of some business of this scale that is growing at this number, right? Which we can see. The growth is huge. Azure is growing more than 50% year over year, right? We were growing at 100% when our base was smaller, but now the base has become so large that it's 50% is a very big number. Office is growing at 22%. Just during the pandemic, Teams, which is our version of Zoom here, reached 250 million subscriptions. And then you have an unparalleled scale. Like, Azure today is in 60 regions across the world, 190-ish countries. And it's more than Amazon and Google combined right now, because Microsoft has this unique position in the industry where we are a cash-rich company, to be honest, and we can afford to scale at that level. The second is we have a fleet. Our current fleet is 5 million rack servers. It's huge. And just if you look at how much stuff we decom every year, decom is like taking things out and putting it in recycle. 10,000 tons of servers we just decommed last year, right? So that's the other challenge, just the unparalleled scale at which we are running at as a supply chain. And the third is the transformation that we are going through, but not just as a supply chain, but as the world together. So specifically over the last 18, 19 months that we have been in this pandemic, it kind of seems forever right now, but if you just look back before that also, there was a transition going in the supply chain overall. But what has happened is that there has been an acceleration to an online business model. And in the next slide, I'll talk to more about what that really meant for Microsoft. But that acceleration has caused pressure on the supply chain in terms of, like, how do we support the new business models that are coming out. All right. The overall cloud business model is evolving, and we need to be able to support the new business models across the cloud. Data privacy and security, like SolarWinds, many of us would have heard, right? It was a big threat that came. It was a big attack. And how are we as a supply chain going to ensure privacy and security for our customers, for us, for our customers, for everybody, right? And then one of the places where Microsoft is leading right now is in the area of sustainability. As a company, there is a pledge to be carbon negative by 2030. So we are going to be carbon negative by 2030. And now multiply that with the 400 plus data centers and the 1500 plus edge sites, stuff where we burn, electricity. How is the company going to evolve to be carbon negative overall? The second is 100% renewable energy by 2025. That's our goal. We want to be there where we are using 100% of renewable energy by 2025, and then zero waste by 2030. So everything that we do will get recycled. There is no waste coming out of our data centers. The 10,000 tons of servers that we decom, either they'll be cannibalized to use back in the cloud, or we will responsibly dispose them off so that there is no waste. So the crux of this slide, if there's one takeaway that I want us as a group to take away, is that we cannot scale this supply chain with humans anymore. We have tried. The data and how do we make data-driven autonomous supply chain is the key in how we see of unlocking our future. There is no way that with this kind of a growth and scale that humans will be able to go and do this work of the supply chain that we are doing today. And that has been the core for us in going on this journey of how do we think about data-driven decision making, how do we think of autonomous systems and autonomous processes, and how do we go on that journey. So with that, I'm going to take a pivot. Sorry, I was doing a time check for myself. I'm taking a pivot and I'm getting into what is supply chain data. So if you think about supply chain data, all of us are familiar with this, but in different vernacular. So the reason that I'm sharing this is that we kind of align our vernacular going into the case study. But if you think about data, right, there is transactional data. This is like orders coming into the system. This is things like returns going back and things like that, right? This is the transactions that are happening with the customer. Then there is master data. This is like the BOM data, the SKU data, the product data, right? Employee data, things that is master data, but doesn't change with the transaction, but feeds the transaction. Then there is reference data, like, location and geography, which is same for everybody. Countries are countries. So it's generally taking a reference from something. And then there is metadata. And metadata is the data about data, basically. And it is becoming key and more critical as we are thinking about learning-based systems. As we are thinking about the AI, ML kind of based systems of the world, metadata is becoming key to understanding the rest of the data, right? Because it's technically just data about data. So as we think of our supply chain, this is the data vernacular that our team kind of works off. And reporting is another entity. You'll hear a lot about reporting in supply chains because we love our metrics. But the reporting consumes all this data. It is not a data in itself, right? It's just a visualization that we create of our data world. So with that, I will move to the next one. Any questions so far? I apologize, I'm not able to see the chat. Piyush, any questions?
No, nothing on chat.
We have a very quiet group.
If you have questions, please post it on chat or raise your hand, whichever ways, so we know you have a question.
Yeah. So coming to data-driven decision making and dimensions, right? So as I said earlier, the data-driven decision making is part of our core strategy for the supply chain. At the scale that we are working right now, humans cannot go and make the needs of the future. But if you ask me honestly, in 10 years from now, or even in 5 or 6 years from now, the way that the AI ML world is evolving, most of the decisions will anyway be autonomous, because you will see that change coming in from the carriers, from logistics, from everywhere, all partners in the supply chain, and that will be I think the integration of AI and ML in supply chain is an inevitable thing that will define the future of how things work. So how we as a team think about data-driven decision making, think about it as 3 separate dimensions. One is what we're calling synthetic intelligence. And synthetic intelligence is basically scale the supply chain by developing autonomous machine-driven capabilities. Simply states, is making machines that can make decisions by themselves, self-adjust to risk, see a change in the environment, and be able to take a corrective step. So to make that real, my customer demand changed. I know how to readjust my supply automatically without any human doing anything. As Microsoft, we are using AI, ML in demand sensing today. I'm sure many of you are doing it in your industries as well. We do it in demand sensing. We do it in customer segmentation. And then we do it in this thing called disposition, which is nothing but how we basically decom a server, take it to recycle, ensure which parts go into which bucket. Now, this is a very interesting problem, but let me start with demand sensing. For us, demand sensing is a challenge because in the cloud, as I said, customers are using us by the minute. So for example, many of us are in office right now, or we're using Microsoft Office or something else. You're making real-time changes to your consumption of the cloud. As big entities, customers are doing the same. And that is causing a change in the usage patterns across the globe for Microsoft. So our team's job is to demand sense that and to be able to proactively ensure that we have the right buffer capacity, the right warehouse capacity. So that is one side of it, which is very similar to a traditional supply chain. The second side, which is more unique to the cloud, is more that we use demand sensing as a way to, in the 0 to 4 hour window, to be able to go and deploy live capacity for the customers. So it's just because of the horizon is so small there, we are looking at demand sensing in minutes and hours, right? The second is customer segmentation. We currently run approximately 7 million customer subscriptions across the world. We need to understand how to segment that. Then disposition I already spoke about, but it's how to responsibly put things for recycle. Digital twins is another thing that we are exploring. It's a new concept, but basically what a digital twin is that it takes some mathematical or a logical representation of the whole supply chain. So you can model your plan, source, make, deliver digitally into a twin, and then use that basically twin to do a bunch of analysis, to figure out risks, to do everything else. So we are currently exploring how can we do better forecasting, and then NPIs or new product intake, how are we going to enable that better? So we're exploring digital twins there. It's still very new technology. This is technology Microsoft sells. So for us, it's free. So yeah. So the next thing is around data transparency and trust. And that's the other dimension of a data-driven universe, is that we have to ensure that once we have an autonomous machine, that we can provide transparency. We can say which decision was made, why, right? So we are using blockchain. We're using currently blockchain to do financials, but also our goal is to be able to track from a mine till recycle the whole life cycle of everything. So like many people here might know that, rare earth minerals are a very important driver right now for the chip and the hardware industry, because cadmium and cobalt are available only in so much quantity across the globe. So the idea is that we can track that mineral from the time it comes out of a mine till the time it makes its way into a hard drive, it makes it into one of our data centers, and that at some point of time we will recycle it out, that we can track this whole life cycle at that level and ensure that it's done responsibly, carbon neutral, things like that, right? And that we can track the whole thing. So we're using blockchain to do that. The second is security and access. So Microsoft is a leader in cloud security right now. We are specifically with SolarWinds and things like that. We want to ensure that there is trust, and trust is a key pillar of the cloud, as I said earlier. And then you have advanced analytics, where you have BI and control tower. This is stuff I think must be familiar to everybody, but this is where we do dashboarding, reporting, things like that. So any questions, or I'm going to move to the case study.
Okay. There was a question here.
Yes.
It said that in cloud, what happens? Let me read it verbatim. So this is from Nihar Kumtekar. He's participant. He's a professor at, and the question is that given the characteristic of a cloud supply chain is very unique in terms of supply chain ownership, that is Microsoft owns everything, and near instant, how do you bring in new customers with legacy software technology into your supply chain who might be with other cloud supply chains?
So we do a couple of things, right? Firstly, Azure has this thing called Azure Arc. It's a software hypervisor that we, as a company, have enabled. That puts a layer between the underlying infrastructure versus what you're running on Azure or the cloud on the Microsoft cloud. So you can have assets running in, let's say, AWS or Google, and still deploy this hypervisor and get a seamless experience for your customers. So that's one. Because generally moving cloud providers for many companies is a big lift and shift, right? The second is that we have enabled tools within our ecosystem that enable that lift and shift. If you want to, get applications that are currently running in a different cloud to enable them on the Microsoft cloud. So there are tools that are mostly semi-automated or can help with a large degree of that lift and shift so that you can make that journey. I hope that answered the question. But those are two things we're currently doing here.
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
So with this, I'm going to move to the case study. And talking to Piyush, it was a good idea to think of a COVID case study because it's, we are all living in this pandemic and it's like a crazy time, to be honest. Imagine like in 10 years from now, we look back at this time and we'll say, oh my God, this is what we did for 2 years. But anyway,
just a time check. Let's finish in maximum 10 minutes. And
yes, sure. Yeah, I'll go fast. So, from a COVID perspective, I want to set the stage about what is telemetry firstly. So we have, let's say it's around 7 million, slightly dated, but we have, let's say, around 7 million subscriptions, users using the Microsoft cloud. There are 100 different offerings that people use of the cloud, which goes into meters. And meters are nothing but just places where we aggregate how much of the cloud is somebody using. It's just customer usage, nothing else. It's a service, so we try to monitor the service. And we take that data and then we use that data for doing things like demand forecasting, capacity decisions, operations, right? And then and many of the supply chain core processes like ship room, buffer calculations, quotas, build-outs are all dependent on how well we do with this sliver of data called telemetry. It is just one part of our data universe. It's the transactional data that we had spoken about earlier. But we are looking at this transactional data and trying to get a sense of how our cloud's being utilized. And we are using that data then for doing things like forecasting, capacity decisions, operations, supply chain, supplier decisions, blah, 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 right? You get the shebang, right? The overall plan, make, source, deliver, the whole thing. So with COVID, what happened? So it all started on the 9th of March. And I remember that date. The date's imprinted in my head because it's only so many times in your career that you have a scary meeting with the CEO. I never had seen Satya all my life till that day. Our team got a call. Our team was front and center. At that time, I was not doing strategy. I was doing data and analytics for the cloud. And Italy went into lockdown. So the moment Italy went into lockdown, you can see how between the 9th of March and the middle of March, basically, or end April, we had this 4x increase in the cloud usage. The amount of capacity that we thought that that all of Europe will consume for the rest of the fiscal year, that was like 4 months, was consumed by Italy in like 1 hour. So as a supply chain, I hope all of us can think that there is no way the supply chain could have geared up for an event like that. It's not, it's not even something that you think about as a outlier. It was not even an outlier event that was in any of our analysis ever, right? So we saw as much as 400% growth in Teams, which is our version of Zoom, happening practically overnight. Right? And then the meeting that I'm telling you with the senior leadership of Microsoft was two things. They said, ensure that hospitals and police stations do not, and the health and safety basically, in all these areas, don't run out of capacity. It was a time when we had 0 buffers left. So now you're basically talking demand shaping, right? That's the only way you can do things like this. So we had to figure out, who are the hospitals and police stations in Italy? That's where we started, or in Europe, because that's how the pandemic kind of rolled out. US was a couple of weeks behind. So in the initial weeks, sorry, the challenge was across the 7 million subscriptions. How do you know who is a police station and how do you know who is a hospital? Because anybody can go online right now and open a subscription with Azure, and they will get they'll get the service. So that was the one challenge. The second was, how do we demand shape to ensure that they don't run out of capacity? Sorry, I've been talking too long, so I'm getting this little thing. So so as a supply chain, this is what we did. We first implemented a manual process, which we realized very quickly we couldn't scale. So we had to use AI, ML technologies to basically segment the life and safety segment practically overnight. Our team was here, and we worked 20, 25 hours for like a week, and it was terrible. And we had to create this segmentation. ML AI came to our rescue. We were able to use those techniques to basically figure out who are these, which is the segment. Then we had to create new buffer strategies for this segment, all happening in real time. So we had to ensure that if there's a hospital and there's a particular region that most hospitals are in, then how do we ensure that that region doesn't run out of capacity? And this is, we are doing this while we have already, our warehouse weeks of supply is 0, right? We have gone down to 0 weeks of supply. Then and then all the because of the China was in lockdown, you're not getting any more supply anytime soon, right? Like you have to re-swizzle what you already have. Then you have we had to figure out what is the on-hand inventory, and we had to get that visibility across our hubs. We have Arrow, and we have our own BMI hubs and things like that, where how much inventory is sitting where and how can we best position it for the need at hand. Then we did another thing which is unique for a cloud supply chain, but is that we changed the very nature of our products. For example, Teams, we were able to change Teams to be able to run on a smaller footprint of servers, so that we can get more capacity out of what we already have. So in the first few weeks of COVID, when you made a call from Teams, right, there was no audio signal, it was just a visual signal, but that in itself freed up like 15% of capacity, right? So things like that were done across Microsoft, and we kind of weathered the first few months. A few lessons that we learned. One is that data-driven is key for us. We have to build a supply chain that is autonomous and data-driven. And then, and the second is that it has to be any future response to a crisis. We have to be geared up to make these decisions in more real time. Right? So those are the kind of learnings that came out. And then putting the case study in perspective, If you just look at the framework that we had shared earlier, synthetic intelligence, we developed a segmentation just for the ML, using ML for the life and safety segment. We enabled a buffer snap strategy. We enabled anomaly detection for that segment. Because anomalies are a big part, as you know, in data, and then you have to figure out what's noise versus what's not. And then the next is from security and access. We have to ensure that anything that we are doing throughout the pandemic is secure. Our customers are kept secure. Data is kept secure. There's no compromise on that at all. And then, given the focus of both the media and our senior leadership, we had to stand up some quick impact analysis, modeling, things like that, leadership reporting, using Power BI and other tools that are out there, was focused on just the COVID response. So this was a lot of work that happened. It happened over a period of 2 months, while our team itself was figuring out how to work remote. We were all went remote, and we had this thing come on us. So that's why that's imprinted very deep in our minds. So with that, that's all I had. If you have any questions, thoughts, sorry, I don't know how to go back up, but yeah, that's my last slide. So thank you.
Thank you. We are open for questions.
Let me do it this way. How do I do that?
You can switch on your mic and just speak up if you have a question. So I had a comment from Pete Dusano. He heads the Arthrex Center in our location. And the idea was, he says he could refer to COVID-19 as a black swan event, not even any supply chain can plan for. And he could relate to the idea that Italy consumed all EU planned demand growth in 1 hour.
Yeah, I mean, that was surprising. I was like, honestly, to be total transparent with everybody here, I was the data team at that time, and when it happened, for the first few hours, we thought it was data anomaly, that it is just error in data, and that it will go away. We did not realize that this was real till approximately an hour and a half, that something was actually going on. Right? We thought this is just like error, and it will just self-correct. So yeah.
Yeah, so there's 2 questions. One is Dedra chat. Go here. Please increase my chat in just a minute. Sorry. Regarding the capacity goals, were you successful in all regards, or any other learnings in capacity?
I think so. Overall, see, the capacity goals we have are SLA driven. Which is, we have a 5 nines SLA, a 4 nines SLA, given on the various customers we have, right, and their requirements. So the goals are set with the customer based on their needs. To say that we were successful is, to meet all, no. We had to demand shape in the initial days of the pandemic. We had to go back to certain customers and say, you know what, we will not be able to support this growth right now because we need to divert our resources for hospitals and medical care that we need to support right now, and that we will kind of default on our SLA here for a bit. But we set expectations that were reasonable with them, and most people, to be very honest, worked with us through that. Right? Worked with us in this demand shaping basically that we did. But in the initial days of the pandemic, you only had so much cloud, right? Like you can't magically grow it. So while we tried, it came down to how well we are going to demand shape. So
yeah, there's a question from Harrison, that how difficult it is to have a plan for scaling sudden surges and drops on cloud resources.
That is an excellent question. So I almost put that in the presentation, but then I thought it'll go a bit too deep. But thank you so much, Harrison, for the question. In the cloud, unlike I think a traditional manufacturing supply chain, one of the difference is how we think of buffers. So buffers are not new in supply chains, right? We all have buffers. But In the supply chain, we maintain three types of buffers. One is what we call the hot buffer. This is the most expensive buffer that runs on the server itself. So like you were to go right now onto the cloud and you were to run a big machine learning algorithm, the server will scale to ensure that you can run that algorithm, right? And that is the hot buffer that is being maintained on the machine to ensure that you can horizontally scale depending on your workload. So when we do demand sensing, we do it at that level to figure out the profiles that our customers have so that we know how much hot buffer to maintain where dependent on SLA. Right? It's by far the most expensive buffer because we are basically maintaining empty capacity on the machine. The second buffer that we maintain is warehouse buffer. This is the buffer that takes how much time it takes us to pick up something from the warehouse and put it in a data center, right? To provide new capacity, generally 6 weeks or whatever. Like we maintain X weeks of supply that we can do that. And then the third part is that because Microsoft, we are in a make model with our servers right now. So we can't, because realistically we can't go to like a Dell and HP and say, you know, give us millions of servers every year. So we actually we are in a make model where we make our own our hardware. SI's response, I mean, Dell and HP, they assemble it for us, but we go and we position components directly with the tier 2 suppliers. So like with the Samsungs of the universe, we'll go and we'll reposition components. So we actually maintain buffer at that level as well. We'll maintain buffer at the component level to ensure that we have supplies there. So what we do is basically a multi-echelon inventory optimization model where we have three echelons running, and those 3 echelons are across the hot buffer, the component, the warehouse, and the component. And that's how we pretty much ensure that we have capacity of when you need it.
Okay, thanks. We'll have to be quick. We have at least three more questions. One is Professor Kohli, Amarpreet Kohli, he has this question. His question was, which technologies do you think will be key for supply chain resiliency and predictability? Which specific technologies would you recommend?
That's a difficult one. So I think if you think about predictability and you think about technologies, what we currently use in the AI ML world for us right now is that we're basically using, we use TensorFlow right now. We use a bunch of other AI modeling methodologies that have helped us build the models. But if your question is like specific around what platforms to go use, I think all of them are great right now. We build off Microsoft just because that's our stack, but I'm seeing innovative work happening across the industry, and there is so much of goodness that's being created. But our default is just because being Microsoft, we use our stack. But there's a bunch of providers out there that have got great technology innovation going on right now.
Pete has a question and actually a request saying that your sustainability goals, and since we are short on time, could you send us some Microsoft documents on the sustainability goals and some other reading on sustainability?
We'll definitely do. I think sustainability can be a talk in itself, in like how Microsoft is doing it. It's a see, if you think about the future, right? Forget Microsoft, forget anything else. As the world, we need to ensure that sustainability becomes core to all our functions, because in 10 years from now, that's going to be the need of the hour. That's going to be the next big thing that we go hit as the world, where we are not running in the sustainable kind of a world, because resources are going to run low, pollution is increasing, all those things are happening. So Microsoft's, what I really love about Microsoft's perspective here is that Satya was not afraid to take that step and say, by 2030 we will be carbon negative, and that we will have 100% recycle, zero waste policy by 2030. We won't we won't cause any waste on the planet.
Okay.
And definitely I'll send things. There's a lot of stuff happening across the company.
I will forward that to our audience. And last question, I'll have to, because we'll have to end here the questions, but take the question from Bianca. How were some of the other sectors that were not hospitals or police departments affected by demand shifts? And how were you able to accommodate your other subscribers?
Yeah, so I think in the initial days of the pandemic, we kind of made our focus to this segment called for hospitals, police departments, basically life and safety, fire departments, things like that, right? Like that became the focus. We prioritized capacity for them. To be honest, there were 1-2 regions in Europe where we had to heavily demand shape, but the rest of the regions we already had capacity that we could support. So there were 2, I think it was Europe, UK Central, that sports Italy, and there was another, I think Amsterdam, where those 2 regions were the ones that got really hot. But and we had to make choices there. We had to make choices like who gets capacity. And a lot of it was prioritized for the life and safety segment. But we were able to, Bianca, set expectations with our customers who were not in the life and safety bucket, saying, you know what, we are going to hold you flat right now. We didn't make anybody go down, but we said, hey, we are not going to support your growth for another, let's say, a week out. And then we will try to re-swizzle our capacity to meet your need, but it'll be like a week out or something, right? And we were able to do that kind of a conversation.
Cool. Right. So we have questions, but I'm going to stop it here because of time things. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. And I'm sure Apoorav is available on LinkedIn or whichever ways. He'll be happy to take your questions and discuss this further if you want to.
Yeah.
So thank you all for being here. We'll send you a feedback form. It'll be emailed to you soon. And please help us on what you thought about this session so we can convey to Apoorav, and also tell us some other sessions that you would want us to host. Remember, it's second Wednesday of every month, and we'll continue to hold such delightful, informative sessions. Thank you very much, Apoorav. This was very nice, at least to me.
No, thank you for the opportunity of coming here and talking to everybody. It's a it's always very good to have an opportunity to share and our learnings of what you have learned, and also just to get the questions and hear how you all think about the experience.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
I will end the meeting. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, especially Pete, for your continuous support.